Orvax stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars seemed to stretch on forever, but his focus was on the incoming reports about Earth. He chuckled to himself as he read through the intelligence data on humanity's military capabilities. Earth, a backwater planet, still relied on outdated technology and tactics. Their weapons were primitive, their strategies basic. Orvax couldn't help but laugh at the idea that such a weak species could pose any threat. As the top war strategist of the Galactic Coalition, Orvax had led countless campaigns to conquer worlds across the galaxy. His mind was sharp, his strategies flawless. No one could stand against him. And yet, Earth was different. Earth had always been on the radar, a small, insignificant planet with a tiny population, barely capable of defending itself. The reports about Earth's military were laughable. No advanced technology, no advanced war tactics. Just old, clunky ships and weapons that were barely functional compared to the wonders of alien civilizations. To Orvax, it was clear this would be a quick conquest. He turned to his officers, who stood behind him, watching with quiet concern. They had been discussing the upcoming invasion, and while most were confident, a few voiced doubts. "Orvax, are we sure about this?" one officer asked, glancing at the data on the screen. "We've received some strange reports from other races. They claim that humans are more unpredictable than we think." Orvax waved his hand dismissively, his gaze never leaving the view of space. "Unpredictable? Nonsense. I've studied their tactics. Their entire military history is built on outdated strategies. If anything, their unpredictability will work against them. They are weak, and their forces are disorganized. We will crush them with ease." The officer remained silent, clearly unconvinced. "But we've seen them resist invaders before, even when they were outmatched. Perhaps they have more to them than we understand." Orvax turned sharply, fixing his officer with a hard stare. "Do not question me again. We are not dealing with a superior enemy. This will be no different than any other world we've conquered. The humans will bend before us." He ordered the fleet to begin their preparations. As the ships were readying themselves for the long journey to Earth, Orvax couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. Another victory for him. Another world to add to his growing list. Earth would fall just as easily as the others. There was no need for concern. The plan was simple: arrive, strike hard, and take control. The fleet launched, its warships gliding silently through the emptiness of space. Orvax leaned back in his chair, confident that victory would come quickly. He reviewed his strategy again, ensuring that every move would be executed with precision. The alien forces would land on Earth, overwhelm its defenses, and subjugate its people. He would be remembered as the one who brought Earth to its knees, just like every other planet he had conquered. But as the journey continued, something began to nag at the back of Orvax's mind. The reports kept coming in from the scouts. Strange signals, unexplained anomalies, and vague warnings from other alien races. They all spoke in hushed tones about Earth's resilience, as though the planet had a hidden strength no one had yet discovered. Orvax couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to these warnings. He shook off the thought quickly. It was likely just fear, the kind of overblown stories that circulated about worlds too small to matter. As the fleet drew closer to Earth, Orvax stood before the holographic map of the planet, preparing for the attack. His fingers hovered over the buttons that would launch the first strike. Earth's defenses, primitive as they were, would crumble under the might of the fleet. He smiled, savoring the thought of how easily it would all fall into place. The humans had no idea what was coming. Yet, in the pit of his stomach, there was a small, nagging feeling, a hint of unease that he couldn't quite shake. It was too late to back out now, of course. The fleet was nearly in range. Orvax pushed the doubt from his mind, focusing instead on the prize that awaited him. The moment he landed on Earth, it would all be over. The humans would submit, and Orvax would emerge victorious once again. The alien fleet arrived at Earth's orbit, the ships glowing with ominous power. Orvax stood at the helm of his flagship, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the small blue planet below. It was hard to believe that something as weak and insignificant as Earth had ever been a threat to anyone. The reports had been clear. Humans were a primitive species with no advanced technology to speak of, no true military power. Their ships were old, their weapons outdated, and their leaders barely competent. Orvax's lips curled into a confident smirk as he gave the order to launch the first wave of attack. The fleet moved with military precision, unleashing an array of powerful weapons designed to cripple Earth's defenses. The explosions rocked the surface of the planet, and as the ships dropped their destructive payloads, Orvax felt a thrill of anticipation. This would be quick. No one could withstand the firepower of the Galactic Coalition. The first few moments of the attack were everything Orvax had hoped for. Human defenses appeared weak, their ships barely able to mount any form of resistance. His confidence grew with each passing second. Earth had nothing that could match the might of the Coalition fleet. This was a victory in the making. But then something unexpected happened. The humans didn't back down. Instead of crumbling, their defenses seemed to adapt. Orvax frowned as his sensors picked up strange, erratic patterns in Earth's defense systems. Ships that should have been destroyed with a single hit were still intact, moving in unpredictable ways. The Earthlings, it seemed, had learned to fight with a kind of desperation Orvax had not expected. They were far more coordinated than he had assumed. "What is this?" Orvax muttered under his breath. He tapped furiously on his console, analyzing the data. The humans were using basic missile systems and outdated weaponry, yet their accuracy was unnervingly precise. Their ships, though old and slow, seemed to anticipate every move of the fleet, dodging and weaving in ways that made no sense. Weapons locked. One of his officers called out from behind him. "They're targeting our supply vessels." Orvax spun around, his heart suddenly racing. How could they know? It didn't make sense. Their weapons were nothing compared to the advanced firepower of the Coalition fleet, yet they had landed several accurate hits on key supply ships. The damage wasn't catastrophic, but the fact that they had struck at all was troubling. Orvax had expected chaos, not strategy. "Increase firepower," he barked, unwilling to acknowledge the possibility that the humans could present a real challenge. He waved off the growing feeling of unease. He was Orvax, the greatest tactician in the galaxy. He had never lost a battle, and he wasn't about to start now. His orders were carried out immediately, and the fleet began firing at Earth's surface with full force. Massive explosions engulfed cities, causing widespread destruction. But still, the humans fought on, responding with everything they had. They were everywhere, on the ground, in the air, in space. No matter how much Orvax's fleet destroyed, the humans refused to stop. Then came the worst part. Just as he thought the battle was turning in his favor, an unexpected fleet of human ships appeared. They were smaller than his own, and clearly built with outdated technology, yet their firepower was devastating. They moved in a coordinated, unpredictable pattern, striking the flanks of his fleet with precision that left Orvax in shock. "This is impossible," he shouted, watching his ships take damage that shouldn't have been possible with the technology they had. The human ships were everywhere, flanking and attacking from all sides, taking advantage of every weakness in his formation. "How are they doing this?" Orvax demanded, fury rising in his chest. His mind raced. No matter how many times he ran the numbers, humanity's resistance didn't make sense. They had no right to be this effective. They shouldn't have been able to stand up to his superior forces, yet they had. For the first time in his long career, Orvax felt a real sense of fear. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting like they had nothing to lose. They were unpredictable, adaptable, and relentless. They didn't just fight with their technology. They fought with their hearts. And in this moment, that was something Orvax had never been prepared for. He clenched his fists as he watched another one of his ships explode. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tide had shifted. For the first time, Orvax felt as though he was the one being hunted, not the other way around. And deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the humans weren't going to stop until they had wiped him, and the entire coalition, out of existence. Orvax paced back and forth on the bridge of his flagship, his mind spinning with the chaos unfolding outside. The human ships, though vastly outnumbered, were proving to be a nightmare. Their tactics were unorthodox, unpredictable, and each move they made seemed to be more effective than the last. His fleet, once so confident in their superiority, was now struggling to keep control. A communications officer spoke up, breaking his thoughts. "Sir, another wave of human fighters approaching. They've shifted formations. They're coming in from below, at an angle we didn't predict." Orvax's eyes narrowed as he turned to the officer. "Do they think they can win this? They don't have the numbers, the firepower. They're just..." He stopped mid-sentence, noticing the officer's grim expression. The humans were adapting. This was no longer the easy victory he had expected. The officer didn't respond immediately. As he worked to analyze the new movement, Orvax's mind raced, trying to come up with a counter-strategy. The humans had already pushed his fleet into defensive positions they hadn't expected. Their ships, small and fast, darted around like angry bees, relentless in their assault. It was as if they knew exactly where to strike, as if they were reading his every move. The hum of the ship's weapons charging up brought him back to the present. "Increase firepower on their lid ships," Orvax ordered. But even as he spoke, doubt began to creep into his mind. Could they really defeat these humans? The thought was preposterous. They were supposed to be weak. "Sir," another officer called out, "we've received an encrypted message from their command center. They're requesting a ceasefire. They want to negotiate." Orvax froze. A ceasefire? After everything that had happened, after the barrage of destruction that had rocked their fleet, the humans were asking for peace. He couldn't help but laugh. The idea was absurd. "Do not engage in any negotiations," Orvax snapped. "This is a military operation. Destroy their forces." His voice was cold and commanding, but deep inside, the nagging feeling that something was wrong only grew louder. Why would they ask for a ceasefire? Were they stalling? Trying to buy time? He shook off the thought, focusing back on the battle. Launch a full assault. Wipe them out. The ships under his command responded quickly, unleashing wave after wave of missiles and energy blasts. But every time they targeted the human fleet, the humans evaded or countered in ways that defied logic. Orvax watched, stunned, as the humans launched precise strikes against the heart of his forces, hitting key locations in his fleet with a level of accuracy he had never expected from such a primitive species. "All units, retreat to a defensive position." Orvax barked, but it was too late. Another explosion rocked the flagship, sending a shockwave through the command center. Orvax gripped the arm of his chair as the ship's systems flickered, and a warning siren blared through the speakers. "Sir, we've lost a third of our fleet," the communications officer shouted, panic rising in his voice. "We need to regroup or we'll be wiped out." Orvax's blood ran cold. His flawless strategy was crumbling. The humans weren't just fighting. They were winning. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had underestimated them. He had dismissed them as nothing more than a primitive species, unworthy of his attention, and now he was paying the price. "They're not just resisting. They're beating us," Orvax muttered under his breath. His hands trembled as he slammed them onto the console in frustration. How? How could they be doing this? The fleet continued to struggle against the onslaught. Human ships, though fewer in number, continued to outmaneuver and outsmart the coalition's superior forces. It wasn't just their ships. It was their strategy, their ingenuity. It was as if they knew exactly how to exploit every weakness, every flaw in Orvax's plan. It was impossible. He had seen every battle, studied every enemy. Nothing had ever come close to this. Orvax's mind raced. There had to be a way to turn this around. But as the battle raged on, one thought kept echoing in his mind. The humans weren't the primitive species he had thought them to be. They were something far more dangerous. The thought chilled him to the bone. "You said." Orvax's mind raced with panic as his once proud fleet continued to be torn apart by the relentless human counterattacks. He had never encountered an enemy like this. His command ship rocked again as another energy burst slammed into the shields. The hum of the impact reverberated through the metal walls, a constant reminder of how close they were to defeat. "Sir, more human ships are inbound." "They're not relenting." One of his officers shouted, voice trembling. "We're losing critical systems. Shields are at 30%. Orvax felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The humans weren't just holding their ground. They were slowly but surely dismantling his forces, piece by piece. His fleet, once formidable and unchallenged, was being reduced to a battered shadow of itself. He had to act, but nothing he tried seemed to work. Every strategy, every tactic he had relied on in countless victories had failed against these humans. "Prepare to fire everything we have left," Orvax commanded, his voice shaking with frustration. "We must crush them before they can regroup." As the order was passed down, Orvax stood frozen, staring at the viewport. The stars outside seemed to blur, a haze of motion and light, as explosions lit up the darkness of space. The humans were still there, moving through the chaos like shadows, their ships darting in and out of the fray with deadly precision. It was as if they could anticipate every move, every attack. How could they be so effective with such inferior technology? "Sir, incoming transmission from Earth," another officer interrupted, drawing Orvax's attention. "It's from their leader. They're offering terms of surrender." The words hit him like a slap. Surrender. They had fought him this hard, destroyed a large portion of his fleet, and now they were offering to surrender. Orvax's confusion deepened into a kind of disbelief. What kind of strategy was this? He had expected them to cower, to beg for mercy, not to continue to fight like this, and then offer to give up. Orvax leaned forward, his fingers tapping nervously on the console. "Patch it through," he ordered, his voice tight with uncertainty. The face of a human commander appeared on the screen. She looked calm, almost indifferent to the destruction around her, as if her ships weren't on the verge of being obliterated. "Orvax," the commander said, her voice steady, "we'll stop the fight if you agree to leave Earth and never return. If you keep pushing, we will fight to the last ship. But know this, we're not backing down. You've underestimated us, and that was your first mistake." Her words echoed through the command room, and Orvax's mind spun. The humans were offering to end the war, but there was no fear in their voice, no sign of weakness. It was as if they had already won in their minds. "Why would you make such an offer?" Orvax's voice was barely a whisper, filled with disbelief. "You're outnumbered. Your ships are nothing compared to ours. You should have been wiped out hours ago." The commander's eyes narrowed, her expression fierce. "That's your mistake, Orvax. You thought we were weak. You thought we would crumble. You thought we were a race of primitive, unworthy creatures. You couldn't have been more wrong. We fight because we have something you will never understand, a reason to defend everything we hold dear. And that, Orvax, is something no fleet in the galaxy can defeat." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. There was no arrogance in her tone, just pure, unyielding confidence. This wasn't a plea for peace. This was a declaration of war on his entire empire, a challenge to everything he had ever believed. The realization hit him like a hammer blow. The humans had never been fighting for survival. They had been fighting for something far greater. He looked around the bridge, his officers staring at him with fear in their eyes, waiting for his response. The words of the human commander echoed in his mind again. "You thought we were weak." For the first time in his career, Orvax realized that he had severely miscalculated. The humans didn't fear him. They feared nothing. And the worst part was that they didn't need to. They had something far more powerful than technology or weapons. They had the will to fight. And that was something Orvax had never been prepared to face. Orvax stood in stunned silence, the words of the human commander still ringing in his ears. He had been wrong, so utterly wrong. He had underestimated humanity in ways he couldn't even begin to comprehend. His mind churned with a growing realization. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The enemy commander's confidence wasn't just a bluff. She had spoken with the certainty of someone who had fought battles, lost comrades, and survived by sheer will. It was clear now that the humans had no intention of surrendering. They were far from desperate. They were determined. "Sir, what should we do?" the communications officer asked, voice wavering with uncertainty. "Their fleet is still engaging us. We've lost more than half our ships. We don't have much time before they wipe us out completely." Orvax didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze shifted to the view outside the ship's viewport, where the remains of his once proud fleet drifted in the void, slowly consumed by the destructive power of the human ships. The humans were relentless, adapting to every move his forces made. It was as if they were learning, evolving with each passing moment. Every time he thought he had them cornered, they found a way to turn the tables. "Sir." The officer pressed again, breaking his train of thought. The question lingered in Orvax's mind. What now? He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The situation was spiraling out of control. His once unbeatable fleet had been reduced to a fraction of its original strength. If they didn't retreat soon, his entire command would be obliterated. "Get me a status report," Orvax finally ordered, his voice cold but laced with the bitter taste of defeat. He didn't want to hear it, but he had no choice. The officer quickly complied, his hands flying over the controls. "We're losing power on multiple ships, sir. Shields are failing across the fleet. The humans are exploiting every weakness, hitting us where it hurts most. We're losing fighters faster than we can deploy them." Orvax's fists clenched in frustration. He had thought they would crush the humans within hours. The humans were supposed to be inferior, weak. He had never considered that their strength wasn't in their ships or weapons, but in their spirit. They fought not just to survive, but to protect their home. "They're not going to stop," Orvax muttered to himself, realization sinking in. "They're not like any enemy we've faced before." The officer spoke again, but this time, the words caught in Orvax's throat before they could even leave his mouth. "Sir, we've lost communication with the other fleets. The humans, they've disabled our ability to call for reinforcements. We're alone." Orvax felt his stomach drop. They were truly isolated now. His fleet was scattered, his forces in disarray, and the enemy was still closing in. A harsh silence fell over the command center as the weight of the situation became clear. Orvax's mind raced, but for once, he couldn't come up with a solution. There was no fallback plan, no escape route. The humans had cut off every avenue he had relied on. "All ships, retreat," Orvax finally ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. "Prepare to fall back to the nearest jump point. Get us out of here now." But as the command was relayed, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. Could they escape? Could they survive this? The moment the words left his mouth, the ship rocked violently once more as another blast from the human fleet struck a vital part of their hull. The ship shuddered, and alarms blared as systems began to fail. The officers scrambled to maintain control, but it was clear. The retreat was already too late. "Sir, we're losing power completely," the engineer shouted, panic rising in his voice. "The engines are going offline." Orvax's mind raced, heart pounding in his chest. This was it. His empire was on the brink of collapse, and the humans had proven to be far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The humans weren't just a threat. They were a force that would change everything. He stared out into the void of space, watching as his fleet was picked apart one ship at a time. The realization was crushing. He had made a grave mistake. He had underestimated the resolve of humanity. The very thing he had taken for granted had become his undoing. The humans were winning. And for the first time in his life, Orvax had no idea how to stop them. Orvax's hands trembled as he gripped the armrests of his command chair, his mind spinning, unable to process the reality unfolding around him. The hum of his ship's failing systems was drowned out by the sound of distant explosions, the last remnants of his fleet being torn apart by the unrelenting human forces. His officers scrambled to maintain control, but it was clear that hope was fading fast. "Sir, we've lost communication with the entire fleet," the communications officer reported, voice thick with despair. "They're being destroyed faster than we can assist. We're on our own." Orvax's thoughts flickered back to the face of the human commander, the one who had offered terms of surrender. That calm, unflinching gaze had been seared into his mind, and now it haunted him. She had been so sure, so confident. And now, Orvax had come to realize that every word she spoke was a reflection of the human's unshakable resolve. "We're not backing down," the commander's voice echoed in his mind. "You've underestimated us, and that was your first mistake." The words stung. He had thought of the humans as an afterthought, a species with no real place in the galaxy. They were supposed to be easy pickings, nothing more than a small, insignificant world to conquer. But instead, they had turned the tables. They had shattered everything he had believed about warfare. Their tenacity, their ingenuity, their refusal to surrender. It was unlike anything he had ever faced. Orvax shook his head, trying to push the crushing weight of defeat from his thoughts. "What's the status on the main engines?" he barked, forcing himself to focus. The engineer glanced up, his face pale. "We're down to emergency power, sir. The engines are barely functional. If we don't make the jump now, we'll be stranded here, and we'll never make it to the next sector." Orvax felt a knot tighten in his chest. Escape. It seemed impossible now. His fleet was decimated, his forces scattered, and the humans were relentless. How had they turned the tide so decisively? How had they become such an overwhelming force in such a short time? "Sir, the humans are coming in for another attack," the tactical officer shouted, her voice panicked. "We can't outrun them. We'll be sitting ducks if we stay here." Panic began to set in, but Orvax pushed it aside. He was the leader of this fleet, and he could not afford to show weakness. There was still a way out, a chance to regroup, to survive. He had to make a decision. "Activate the jump drive," Orvax ordered, his voice resolute despite the turmoil in his mind. "Prepare for an emergency jump. We're going to make it out of here, no matter what it takes." The engineers worked frantically, but the countdown was already too late. Another blast hit, this time tearing through the hull with a deafening screech, and the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered, the walls groaned under the strain, and the jump drive sputtered, struggling to function under the immense damage. "We can't make the jump, sir," the engineer yelled, his voice breaking. "The drive is critical. If we try it now, it could tear the ship apart." Orvax felt the walls closing in on him. The humans were too close, and their ships were like a swarm of locusts, closing in with no mercy. There was no escape. His fleet was gone, and now it looked as though he might be next. And then the voice of the human commander filled his mind again. "You thought we were weak. You thought we were nothing." In that moment, Orvax realized the truth. It wasn't just their tactics that had destroyed his fleet. It was their hearts, their unrelenting spirit. They didn't fear death. They embraced it. And now, as he faced the inevitable destruction of everything he had built, Orvax could only watch as the human ships closed in. With a final, shuddering breath, Orvax turned to his officers. "Prepare for impact," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Make peace with your fate." The ship shuddered again, this time with a force that sent Orvax sprawling from his chair. A deafening roar filled the room as the hull buckled under the weight of the human assault. There was no more time. His fleet had failed. His empire had failed. And as the black void outside the viewport filled with blinding light, Orvax understood at last. Humanity had won, and he, Orvax, had been the architect of his own destruction. The silence was deafening as the last of the ship's systems flickered out, leaving only the soft hum of emergency lights. Orvax lay motionless on the cold floor of the command center, his mind slowly piecing together the horrifying realization of what had just happened. The ship was lost. His fleet was lost. And there was nothing left to do but wait for the inevitable. For a moment, he allowed himself to think about what had led them to this point. The humans, their tactics, their strategies, their resilience, had completely shattered everything he had ever believed about war. They weren't just a species to be conquered, or a world to be subjugated. They were something far more dangerous. They were fighters, unwilling to yield, no matter the odds. They fought not just for victory, but for their homes, their families, their very existence. And in that drive, they had become a force of nature. The human commander's voice echoed in his mind once more. "We will never bow. You may have underestimated us, but that mistake will be your last." Orvax closed his eyes, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He had thought he could crush humanity with ease, that they would crumble under the might of his fleet. But instead, they had been the ones to crush him. They had turned his tactics against him, adapted to his every move, and outsmarted him at every turn. He had never seen such tenacity, such raw, unyielding strength. And now, as the lights dimmed and the ship's final systems shut down, Orvax knew that humanity had changed the course of the galaxy. They had shown him what true power was. It wasn't in advanced weapons or towering fleets. It was in the hearts of those who refused to give up, no matter the cost. Outside the ship, the remnants of his once mighty fleet drifted aimlessly, each vessel a silent testament to the price of underestimating humanity. He could only imagine what the survivors of his empire would face. What would remain of their honor now? What would be left of their pride? In that moment, Orvax felt the weight of his entire species' arrogance bearing down on him. The galaxy would never forget this day. The day that a small, seemingly insignificant world had shown the greatest empire in the stars the true meaning of defeat. The ship's final shudder sent Orvax back to the present, and with it came a single thought. The war was over. Humanity had won, and they had done it with nothing more than sheer willpower and the belief that they could survive. No technology, no weapon, no strategy could have prepared him for what he was witnessing. As the lights went dark for the final time, Orvax let out a single bitter laugh. It wasn't the laugh of victory or of triumph. It was the laugh of a defeated conqueror, realizing too late that he had played into humanity's hands. In the distance, the human fleet, victorious and relentless, closed in, ready to finish what they had started. But Orvax, the once proud alien strategist, had already lost, and there was nothing left but the vast, unfeeling emptiness of space and the undeniable truth. Humanity had not just survived, they had conquered.